Welcome to the definitive guide to MTA, or multi-touch attribution. We're going to break this down today because it's a super hot topic. If you're using things like Northbeam or Hyros or Wicked Reports, why they were designed, what promise they're supposed to deliver on, and where do they actually present far more of a liability than anything close to something you can use to be successful. Let's break all of that down. Plus, why isn't multi-touch attribution legitimate in the first place? And well, what should you do instead? We're going to break all that down. Plus, there are a few multi-touch attribution tools that I actually enjoy. So let's completely break everything I'm going to say and give an explanation to why those are helpful as well. That being said, I really appreciate your time. I know that you could be literally anywhere on the internet right now, and you've chosen to spend your time here with me. If you enjoy these types of videos, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. The algorithms love that. Comment below with any questions, and make sure to read down in the description of this video for details on all sorts of things around multi-touch attribution that can really help you get more clarity. If you enjoy that stuff and you want more information, hey, go ahead, sign up for the newsletter at newsletter.facebookdisruptor.com, or go on over to disruptorschool.com and check out all of the wonderful programs we have there, from the Facebook Ads MBA program to Sarah Levenger's new course. There's a lot of really great stuff. I am here to ultimately help you see more success and less stress. And let's dive in today primarily with multi-touch attribution into the difference between what makes an ad agency report look good and what helps a brand really grow. Because fun fact, they're almost mutually exclusive. So what is MTA, multi-touch attribution, and who does it help? Well, first off, multi-touch attribution is the idea of saying, well, you can't just give credit to the last thing that touched somebody according to that last thing. Like, you might get credit for a sale from somebody that opens an email, but they might have also searched something on Google yesterday and seen an ad on Facebook in the last 5 days, and maybe been exposed to something on TikTok. You could theoretically get attribution from any one of those places or all of them. Now, your report might say you made 4 sales, but your store says you only made 1. So the idea of multi-touch attribution is, how do we account for all of this stuff so that ultimately we can see who gets credit? Multi-touch attribution platforms like Northbeam and Hyros and Wicked Reports are basically built around the idea of who gets credit for what. Now, this is tremendously helpful if you're an ad agency looking to understand how much credit you get for the revenue that your client receives, and more importantly, what inside of your ecosystem gets the credit for that work. What ad set, what campaign, etc., is the reason for revenue today. Ultimately, multi-touch attribution is built around the idea of retroactively assigning credit to specific efforts so that ultimately you could understand theoretically what you're supposed to do in the future. Now, we'll break down in their next segment of why isn't multi-touch attribution legitimate at all. We'll break down into what's fundamentally wrong with that entire statement. I would akin it to trying to say, what is the weight of a butterfly's dream? You're trying to tangibly measure a fictitious idea. Now, that being said, a multi-touch attribution tool ultimately is designed to try to solve this problem of, well, who gets credit so that we can begin to make decisions? But a retroactive report card is only effective in that individual use case for each individual customer. Now, here's the problem. If you get 10 sales, it is extraordinarily unlikely that any of those 10 people behaved in the same way. Now, what if you get 1,000 sales? It's also extremely unlikely that any of those 1,000 people saw the same marketing messaging at the same time, from the same place, in the same order, to take the same action. And the reason for this is manifold, but ultimately it comes down to we all exist in a dynamic environment. So it's very difficult to say, well, first touch, here we introduced the idea, and then they saw some more ads and they clicked, and then they searched on something and they signed up for an email address, and ultimately email got the sale. Now, that's a great pitch for an email ad agency that says, well, we get the credit for the sales, because to be fair, they sent an email, somebody clicked on that email and they bought. Yes. But that doesn't mean that the way you're going to 10x your business is by sending 10x more emails. Now that makes sense. But now that means the insight from the multi-touch attribution tool of your choice doesn't really work. Let's take another example that is tremendously common, especially with Facebook marketers. Well, what ad made the sale? We have a killer ad that's getting a great ROAS, etc. Do you really? My point is, you might have ads that get a lot of spend while an ad account looks good. Sure. And that ad might exist in several ad sets. Great. Well, you might say, well, I've got a lookalike and I've got an interest group and I've got something else. And the argument is, well, my interest groups widely outperform broad. Why do you say that? Well, because you're getting the report on attribution that says, well, my sales that come from the interest group are happening at a higher ROAS than the ones that are coming in off of broad. And my retargeting is better than broad. How often do we hear that's better than broad? Sure. The attribution of that sale to the last touch point might very well be the one-day view from that broad or that interest group or that retargeting audience. You might say, well, I don't do one-day view. I only do one-day click and that's it. Okay. So it's the last thing they clicked on. Let me ask you this. If you're selling shoes, did you invent the shoe? Are you able to say that nobody has ever gone to, that there's one, no other brand in the world selling what you sell? Two, the people that have bought from you have never seen the idea or ever made a purchase in their life or been exposed to anybody else that has ever made a purchase in their life, anything close to what you sell. And three, that you're able to give 100% credit to whatever the last thing was that's put them across the line. Now, we know that that is completely ludicrous. So the idea of multi-touch attribution is to say, well, this thing touched somebody first, and then we warmed them up here, and then we got the sale. Great. The problem is, nobody behaves the same way. So that multi-touch attribution is at best an average aggregate of whatever model makes the person that bought that multi-touch attribution tool happy. And doesn't actually solve for the vast majority of use cases, but is instead effectively averaging averages to find something that kind of makes sense. The problem is that's not actionable in any way, but it does help to say, well, our Facebook agency did X, our email agency did Y, our search department did X, Y, and Z. Our influencers did X, Y, and Z, and that's great information. The problem is the use of a multi-touch attribution tool to tell you how much credit any platform gets for any specific conversion is not a solution that is scalable to everybody. And in a very real case, when I was setting up, working with Facebook, back in the day with the engineering team, you set up advanced matching, which is what broad targeting is kind of built on, back in 2017 and 2018, which made audiences obsolete. By the way, if you're still using audiences, hopefully this helps. We did a study. I was running New Balance at the time. That was one of my big clients. At cold prospecting, broad, 20 to 30 cents of every dollar might have been the first time somebody saw a New Balance ad on Facebook within the 6 months or year time period that we were tracking them. But they had abandoned cart on Reebok, Nike, Converse, Vans, or what was the other one? I can't remember the other brand. Anyway, point is, it had to be at 5 brands because they won't, cause for privacy concerns, they won't give you the exact information beyond the clarity of 5 brands. The point is, 20 to 30 cents of every dollar we spent on cold prospecting was actually a bottom of funnel retargeting ad. Now, the reason that that's really interesting is, well, our ad that got credit for the sale happened to be the ad that appealed to somebody that abandoned cart on another competitor's marketing funnel. If we're going to make the decision of this is the ad that works, we now have to control our competitor's marketing funnel in order for that to be a stable environment we can scale with. That makes no sense at all. And when you start to chase down interest groups and lookalikes and retargeting, you're ultimately saying the reason that audience or the reason that ad did well is because of the sales attributed to it. The problem is you can't control that attribution customer journey because ultimately nobody is net new. Every single ad is a retargeting ad. So if you can't control the customer journey and you're getting people coming in at very cold or piping hot, the reason that interest group worked is because that impression was lucky enough to hit somebody today. And maybe it's got some low-hanging fruit and you spend into it and it works great for a week or a month. And then ultimately you get rid of it. The point of this is ultimately your MTA is telling you how to retroactively give credit to things that aren't scalable decision making. That will cripple you fundamentally forever. And it's designed to help ad agencies look good, not to help brands scale. That's a big deal. Now, why isn't multi-touch attribution legit? Why is what I'm saying of North Beam is built around solving a problem that is unsolvable because the question is illegitimate? Why is Hyros basically there to feed the ego of the marketer and actually a liability to the growth of a brand? Why is Wicked Reports really powerful and almost useless when it comes to in-platform decision making? Well, we talked a lot about this, about what is MTA and who is it designed to help, because that explains a lot of it. But getting down to why isn't this information legitimate is because it might be an accurate reflection of the average customer journeys that have come through your store. The problem is it doesn't help you make future decisions. Data that is inactionable is useless. My point here is ultimately, if you get a whole bunch of information and based on that information, you're not able to make any decision, how helpful was that information? Does it in fact help you to understand that 20% of customers see this ad inside of this Facebook campaign, and then they see an email, and then they go over here and we're going to get 40% credit to search and 30% over to email and 10% to Amazon, and then that broad campaign, well, it loses money at the top of the, but the interest group does really, really well because of the ROAS, and then we've got this retargeting ad set that's doing really well. We know the ROAS is like a 5 and that's unsustainable. Really, maybe it's a 2 and we'll just keep scaling it. That is a tremendously complex situation. It's also completely illegitimate because you have no way of controlling how somebody entered that situation. You have no way of controlling how that works. And ultimately, what's most important is that doesn't help you solve the growth of your business. MTA, multi-touch attribution. I've seen this done above and beyond the Hyros and Wicked Reports and North Beams of the world. I've seen this installed in 8- and 9-figure businesses. Let me tell you what ultimately happens. The end game for multi-touch attribution is one of 3 things. First, the brand is really successful with really smart people running every department. And the attribution model that everybody's happy with is the one that makes every department look good on the P&L. Situation number 2. The business is really successful because the business model is phenomenal and it's really good at acquiring profitable customer journeys. And because of that, It will live and die, not so much because of the advertising, although the advertising is helpful. It lives and dies because the business model is tremendously strong. And to be fair, most successful businesses fall into this category. They are really, really good businesses. And spending money on ads promotes that business. But it's not the reason that they're super successful or fail miserably. Most brands fall into this. Now, there's some unicorns that index way out of this. And there are some brands where legitimately really good marketing campaigns were the reason that they really blew up. Look at FTX. Really good influencer marketing campaigns is the reason that it blew up. You can directly point to one thing being the reason that everything else did really well. Those are the extreme exceptions to the rule. Odds are your store has a pretty decent business model. Odds are your store is pretty good at advertising. And odds are your store isn't going to succeed or fail miserably because of the efforts of any one specific person in any one specific marketing department. Odds are your store, what's holding you back isn't figuring out how to scale Facebook to the moon. It's figuring out how to get a better lifetime value out of your customers and ultimately figuring out the most efficient way of starting customer journeys to mature to that lifetime value, what we call PSM. Scaling a business is all about the acquisition of profitable customer journeys. The problem here is that these tools that pitch themselves. Now, there are other tools out there, but those other tools do not pitch themselves as multi-touch attribution marketing tools. And that's a very important distinction. It is in the DNA of Hyros and Wicked Reports, etc., to tell you what ad gets credit. That exists because the marketer, the client for that business, is more interested in understanding how to get credit than in how to grow the business. And that's a very different conversation. If you've ever noticed that ad sets die after a while because you're using an interest group or a lookalike audience or your retargeting audience becomes too saturated or something and it eventually stops working, and you say, well, all audience is fatigue. I'm here to tell you that's objectively not true. 100% not true. Fraud doesn't fatigue. Fraud is effectively infinitely scalable to the size of your market. When you are using these audiences to try to chase yesterday's performance and be reactive to a average of averages view on a customer journey, at best, you are going to run out of the unfair advantage that potential investment has over just going broad. And to be fair, that happens a lot. You can chase interest group after interest group after interest group and continue to scale it to the moon and then it dies, and scale it to the moon and then it dies, and scale it to the moon and then it dies. And maybe that business grows or it doesn't. The point here is that business going from a $2 million business to a $20 million business has nothing to do with the audiences that you're targeting. It has nothing to do with what ad gets credit for a sale. In fact, when you try to start going down the rabbit hole of chasing multi-touch attribution to see what gets credit so you can try to make decisions based on retroactive data of averaging averages of customer journeys that you cannot control, eventually every one of those decisions depreciates in value, which is why we ultimately have to get to platforms being simple machines built on AI and machine learning, where effectively you're training your employees to get better and better over time. Now, every time you turn off an ad set because it fatigued, that means you've invested into an asset that depreciates over time. And when you turn it off, you've effectively run out of opportunity and ultimately wasted your investment. Now, the reason, what this has to do with MTA and multi-touch attribution is the only reason you're going to use multi-touch attribution is because you have multiple audiences, because you have multiple campaigns, because you're chasing down 10 different versions of an ad. It's there to provide an answer to a question that you shouldn't be asking in a way that ultimately delivers information that you can't trust, so that you ultimately try to prioritize being reactionary to customer journeys you can't control. And the only reason this really has value is because it is feeding the ego of the marketer. And that's not a slight against marketers. To be fair, most people that run in advertising and work at agencies and all of that were taught that this is what's important. The problem is systemic in the industry. The education of what KPIs to value is fundamentally flawed. So MTA, multi-touch attribution, is basically designed to be a very sexy answer to a question that doesn't mean anything and ultimately causes more harm than good, to justify the investment in depreciating assets, ultimately to conduct an effort that does not scale the business. That's why MTA isn't legit. It might be accurate to some extent, depending on whose opinion. And generally, the person whose opinion actually matters is the person paying the bill. And that is a fundamentally flawed way of looking at data. That's no good. No good at all. So, we don't like multi-touch attribution. It's actually kind of nonsense. It's not legitimate, and it only helps the advertising agency basically not get fired and look good by trying to take as much credit for everybody else's work as possible in a way that allows them to make decisions to heavily invest in depreciating assets and ultimately spend a lot of time and effort doing something that will fundamentally not contribute to the growth of a business in an overwhelming number of situations. What do we do instead? Well, we can use these tools to validate ideas and monitor the change when we're trying to plan for incremental lift. That matters. When we say, what happens when we spend less in interest groups and more in broad? Generally speaking, our search volume goes up. How do you tell that? In a really easy way, if you don't have a simple dashboard like an ecosystem ROAS doc, which we teach in the Facebook Ads MBA program, go to Disruptor School to check that out, disruptorschool.com to check that out. If you don't have that, a multi-touch attribution tool can be great because it gives you that report. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of solutions for that. In my experience, Triple Whale, and the way that they're solving the problem, is light years ahead of how Northbeam and Hyros and Wicked Reports are solving it, because it's less designed into committing itself to being a multi-touch attribution tool and more designed to help you understand the contribution from every marketing effort. Now, there's a big difference between what gets credit and what's contributing to results. So the point here is, if you can begin to understand the impact of a change in your marketing mix, if you can begin to understand the impact of evolving your strategies, especially in relationship to the acquisition of profitable customer journeys, now you can legitimately start making real big decisions. For instance, what if we say success on Facebook isn't tied to ROAS, but it's more tied to a certain CPA at a certain CPM with a certain level of spend? Well, we can say, we know that if we get a CPA at this on Facebook, ultimately blended across our ecosystem, we're getting a net output CPA of X. Great. Well, what do we need to do to make that happen? Some people will say, let's ramp up retargeting. Great. But then you're starting to see far more of an overlap between your retargeting and your search, between your retargeting and your email. And MTA solutions will help you understand that overlap. Basically, how incremental is this result? To be fair, Triple Whale does this in a very simple and straightforward way. Tools like Wicked Reports and Northbeam will do that in a sort of a back-ended way because they're not designed to show you that solution. They're actually designed to tell you what to do based on really bad data instead of saying, well, this is the impact. And tools like HighRoast don't address it at all. I mean, to be fair, my personal opinion, tools like HighRoast, that is a predatory tool designed to give folks that have been trained to value the wrong things information that is ultimately harmful to them. My opinion, my experience, take it for what it's worth. Now, that being said, moving forward, what should we do? What we should be doing is taking a look at, well, what happens when we reduce, what happens if we shift our budget from retargeting to broad? Generally speaking, we're going to see more stability in our CPA. We're going to see a higher volume of net new customers into our funnel. And we're going to see a good lift, an opportunity for email and Amazon and Google, etc. What happens when we try to really ramp up retargeting on Facebook? Well, our Facebook number is going to look better. But also we're going to have way more overlap with other channels. So that number is looking better, but it's far less incremental. And we're getting far fewer people into the store. So if we continue to lean into that, ultimately we're getting a better ROAS, but unable to scale. How familiar does that sound? If we get out of the use of interest groups and lookalikes, ad sets that we invest heavily into and then eventually turn off. If we stop doing that and instead started focusing on making broad work, if we instead of chasing, throwing money around from different campaigns and ad sets, basically threw it all into one thing and made that thing as strong as possible, what happens? Well, our platform, Facebook, contribution to our overall business, our blended CPA, is far more stable, which means it's a lot easier for us to define what success looks like. And what success looks like tends to be an allowable level of lower efficiency. When you're running lookalikes and interest groups and retargeting, maybe you need your Facebook CPA to be at 25 to break even. If you're running it abroad, it could probably be a 30. Why? Because you're getting more traffic, and you're getting more email signups, and you're getting more search on Amazon and Google. To be fair, you're also getting more organic reach. You're getting more earned reach, because more people are finding out about your brand on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook. You're getting more market awareness. You're leaning into basic marketing fundamentals, which means you're able to scale your business, even though the platform itself doesn't necessarily look as good. And what happens when you can allow yourself to have a 30 and you're getting like a 26? Well, eventually you're going to have this stockpile of money that you say, look, I'm going to start investing more of it. I'm going to scale Facebook, not because the ROAS on any ad set is good, not because any one ad is getting credit, but because my overall marketing efficiency based on the contribution from each platform is really good and trending in the right direction, giving me a margin with which to invest. And I can take that money and increase my investment in the thing that amplifies my entire business, which is what Facebook does. It's a business model amplification tool. Now, if you're paying attention, what this really means is we don't need to use multi-touch attribution to make in-platform decisions. That's about the dumbest thing you can do. Be fair, it's smart if you want a report to look good. It's bad if you want to grow a business. If you're trying to take as much credit for every action as possible because you're an ad agency trying not to get fired, you want a North Beam, you want a high roast, you want a Wicked report that says that you are the reason revenue happened. But ultimately, do you think people are more concerned with the reason that revenue happened or the reason the business is growing? What do you think is fundamentally more important to the growth of a business? Investing in its growth in a sustainable, projectable fashion, or taking as much credit as a selfish team member? Multi-touch attribution is designed as the tool for a selfish team member to make themselves available to take as much credit as possible. With the exception, in my experience, of the way the triple whale is designed, where it can be used like that. But it's also just as easily used to understand the contribution to your blended overall business model and marketing mix, and measuring the impacts of changes so that you can use it to validate the decisions that you've made and ultimately understand the impact of the change in your marketing mix. If you are marketing on more than one channel, if you are doing email, Google, and Facebook, it is time to give up the idea of understanding what ad or ad set or campaign gets credit and start focusing on not worrying about audiences at all and start worrying about measuring the incremental impact to your marketing mix by the contribution from your marketing channels. If you're going to use your multi-touch attribution tool to deliver that type of answer, then it is 100% a good investment. There are tools designed with that in its DNA, and there are tools specifically sold to be the antithesis of that. In today's video, we really went over what tools are designed to help get credit and what tools completely let you measure the incremental effect of marketing decisions to validate the choices you've made that ultimately result in fundamental growth for the business. And I'll leave you with this. No matter which way you decide to move forward with this, remember one very simple thing. At no point should you ever be using any multi-touch attribution tool to make in-platform decisions between the investments of certain audiences over others. And if you are still using the language of, well, interest groups and lookalikes work better than broad, you are fundamentally missing the whole point. That being said, YouTube thinks you might like a couple of these things. Go ahead and subscribe. And hey, until next time, I'll see you on the internet.